Hi, part ones. I just thought I should do a follow-up to the presentation on the LGBTQ plus presentation we had on Thursday. For those who attended and those who couldn't attend too, I think it's a really important topic. It is the reality in our schools that our genders are not as defined as we once had thought or wanted to believe. And it's affecting our students earlier and earlier. It used to be that kids, by the time they got to high school, they might start questioning or start accepting their natural identity. But it's starting to happen more and earlier. And so elementary school teachers have to deal with this as well. And it's become more diverse. It's no longer you're either heterosexual or homosexual. There's a divergence of sexual identity, and we need to understand what they are and to understand that this is what it is. This is it's not something made up. It's not something people I don't know, there's so many conspiracy theories out there that just kind of drives me crazy. People are not believing the natural progression of things in life, right? But we have to understand the children we teach and understand that as a human race, we have come to the point in history where we have enough knowledge and research and life experience to understand that is not cut and dry. It's not one or the other, right? And it's dangerous if you just go into the Bible and do a literal interpretation of what it's like to be human, right? And so we've already looked at that in one of your Dropbox assignments. You looked at literal fundamental, and I commented on, for a lot of people, just to reinforce the fact that we are not meant to read the Bible literally. Okay, if we do, we're going to hurt people. And the Bible is supposed to be a love story, but it has been used as a weapon, particularly for our brothers and sisters who do not fit into the heterosexual identity of the human construct. And I just remember teaching this when I was, a younger teacher. I was teaching grade 12 religion, and some of the information I had back then was really, different. And it was scary to teach this too, right? But the one thing I remember having some information on something called brain sex, and the fact that we are born into our sexual identities. And even when I started teaching this, it wasn't all acceptable, in terms of that if this was natural or whether this was nurtured. The debate was very strong even back then. But I particularly remember a video I showed my grade 12s about a mother, and this was in the States, and a very Christian woman, and her son was gay, and she tried to get the gay out of him, basically. I'm trying to think of the right words here. Change him, convert him. There we go, there's the word. To convert him into a heterosexual boy by just blasting Christian music and quoting scripture and praying the gay out of him. Sounds ridiculous, but this is what was going on. And this poor young man eventually took his own life. The pressure from his mother was too much for him. And so they interviewed the mother post, the death of her son, and her coming to terms with this. And she realized what a mistake she had made. That it was her persistent faith bombing that caused her son to take his life. So we've come a long way, even in the course of my career, and even at the end of my career, just in the last 2 or 3 years, I remember there was a greater amount of students coming out to our open arms group, our support group for students in the LGBTQS plus community, and more kids dealing with transitioning. And I'll probably spend an hour if I go into the stories, and what I learned from these students. And that's the best way. If you are born heterosexual, okay, like me, I have to learn from people who are not. And my greatest teachers have been people who were born into a different gender identity from the norm of society. And I've learned by listening to their stories, their pain, and their struggle. And that's the best way we can do this. And one of my closest friends, I've learned the most from him too, in terms of what that is like. And I learned so much from my students. And I even had to, as a chaplain, I remember this one grade 9 student, it was the year I was retiring. I would love to know what happened to her. She was so strong and so determined in her goal to transition eventually. And I had to speak to her mother. So she asked me if I would speak to her mother. Her mother came into my office. We spent a couple hours. And I had to assure her mother, I brought out the catechism. I had to assure her mother she's okay. She will be okay too. That this is not deviant behavior that she's adopted out of her choosing. That this is the way she was created, and she was created in the image and likeness of God. So this is so important in our ministry as Catholic teachers. So there's so much pain that our children are experiencing in this life. I mean, there's so many areas and levels of pain that intersect their lives as they're trying to become, adults. And we got the social media, we got all the violence, we've got the over-sexualization of our society and that message coming through to our students. And we've got the pain of being bullied, and even greater pain if you're being bullied because of your gender or your sexuality, right? And, the suicide rate is very high. I remember as a chaplain too, I got a call from a student that decided not to jump. And he asked me if I would come pick him up at the subway station. And he's turned into an amazing young man. But there was that moment for him as a high school student. It was too difficult to deal with who he was in his gender, his sexual identity. So if you don't believe it, in terms of that you're born this way, in whatever way it is, then please really do talk to people that are living this, that did not choose this, but they're living out how they've been created. And I think that's the first point there. If you're not there, then you have to kind of come to that step first, right? And in the presentation, they did a really good job. And there's things you have to understand too in regards to this issue. First of all, the long term, I just say LGBTQ plus because that naturally rolls off my tongue, and I'm going to look down my paper here. It really is LGBTQI2S plus. And so you even have to know what that means. Okay, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, two-spirited. So even like that term has expanded over the years. In the past, it was just, gay or lesbian, or just homosexual. We just used the term homosexual to kind of as a blanket. And then LGBTQ, then LGBTQ plus, and now LGBTQI2S plus. So we have to also know what's involved now, that the diversity of that has expanded over the years, and understand each term. Understand what a lesbian is, understand what it means to be gay, understand bisexuality, right? People who are attracted to both sexes. I had a friend who was in a relationship with a woman for a long period of time, and then she ended up actually getting married to a man and having a baby. And it's not, she was just forcing herself. Like at that time, she was attracted to this woman. When that relationship ended, she ended up in a relationship where she was attracted to a man. She didn't force herself to be attracted to a woman, or she didn't force herself to be attracted to a man. There's that bi attraction, right? Transgender. You know, people who are born into a body that feels foreign to them, you know, that is a real issue, right? And we know this is a struggle, and I paused because I wanted to talk more about that, but this video is going to go on too long. I'm going to pause there. You know, intersex is interesting, right? Because again, people are born sort of with a gender identity where the genitals might not match, or they might have both sets of genitals or chromosomes that are, you know, there's so much going on in the human body. And as it is, those who are fully, let's say fully heterosexual, there is a combination of male female hormones in our bodies, right? You know, me going through menopause, right? I'm losing some of the female hormones, and you know, and then you start to feel the effects of the other hormones, right? Thus the little hairs on the chin. Oh my goodness, it happened, right? So things like that, like just even within our bodies, we're not purely one sex, that there is a combination in there, you know, and that's the reality, right? We can't ignore that. That's biology, right? We know that, right? So you have to understand this to minister to your children in your classroom properly, to be there so that they don't feel excluded, to be there so that you can listen to them. Because if you have all kinds of preconceived notions, then you're going to not be able to listen to them fully with your heart, right? And offer them that love and care that they need, that they might not be getting at home, or they might be scared to disclose at home. It's a very lonely, scary place to be if you don't feel like you fit in and you're trying to figure out why and how to accept who you are, right? So there's things, you know, from the presentation: gender identity, gender expression, there's biological sex, and then there's being attracted to. So it's complex, right? Our whole sexual identity, right? So there's a specter of gender identity, right? So, you know, come to understand that and to learn about that. So if you weren't able to go to that presentation, I hope somewhere down the road you'll be able to go to a presentation or listen to someone or read and to understand what this spectrum is, okay? And then when we look at scriptures, this is where I wanted to land, right? Really, if you put this into perspective, okay? So there's 7 verses in the Bible that say homosexuality is a sin. I'm going to come back to that. There's 12 verses that speak out against divorce. I'm putting things into perspective, right? There's 4 verses that talks against having sex with someone who's menstruating. Oh my gosh, I couldn't say it. Women who have their period. 2,350 verses about money, okay? And 300 verses dealing with social justice in the poor. Kind of put that into perspective in terms of what are the concerns of our ancestors, our faith ancestors, and what's in our Holy Scripture, right? So just put that into perspective. And if you just land on Leviticus and St. Paul, which seem to be the 2 sources of where if you want to find a stone in the Bible to throw at someone who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, you're going to go to Leviticus or St. Paul, and you're going to gather your stones there to throw. Okay? And that's a mistake, because you have to know in the context in which they speak out against homosexuality, right? A lot of what was being said was against deviant sexual behavior. And it didn't mean homosexual exactly against homosexual. There's a lot of heterosexual activity, sexual activity that, deviated from heterosexual sex. So a heterosexual having homosexual or like a gay relationship when they weren't. I hope that's making sense. St. Paul spoke out against the Roman soldiers about having boy toys for sex, right? So it wasn't like they weren't speaking out against two homosexual people who were in love and having a loving relationship. That wasn't what script the passages in scripture are talking about. They're talking about, heterosexual people can corner the market on deviant sexual behavior. So we don't even have to go beyond that, okay? What people do in all aspects of who they are as a human being, people aren't angels with their sexuality, right? I hope you guys get what I'm talking about here. It's kind of weird doing this on a video without having me reading facial expressions to see if I've gotten through. Okay, so it's also important to know what the Catechism says. I'm gonna end with the Catechism here. Okay, so in Article 2358, it says, the number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. Oh my God, what's wrong? Why can't I speak today? They do not choose. They do not choose their homosexual condition. Okay? For most of them, it is a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Okay, I didn't say this. I didn't write this. This is the Catechism of the Catholic Church saying they must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. Every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. I know some people in the church proper need to read this once in a while. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite to the sacrifice of the Lord's cross the difficulties they may encounter from their condition. So this gets confusing because you do get people in the church, you get priests in some parishes in their homilies, that will speak out against homosexuality. Those are just human beings dealing with their own fears. Okay? And we get that everywhere in every capacity. Okay, but someone who has overcome their own fears and their own questions are using the Catechism will not speak out in a negative way. Father James Martin, if you want to follow him on Facebook, is probably one of the key people in the Catholic Church that ministers to the LGBTQ plus community. And he's very public, very vocal. The Pope supports him. But a lot of people don't like that, right? Because there's a lot of people in the church that are fearful of things that are different, and they're fearful of homosexuality still, and it's just, I don't know. I don't know what to say. People have to get there in their own time. Now, one of the biggest problems in the church is they will not marry a gay couple. Okay, and the reason being is it says this in the script in the Catechism. So I'm going to go above what I just read, right? So this is actually before what I just read. It says the homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity. Homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. So let me just address this. I have a hard time with this, but I've had to come to terms with why this is there, right? Because originally, when church teachings came together, the intrinsic disorder, right, is the fact that they cannot procreate. So the whole teaching of marriage in the church is to unite, so it's unitive and procreative, that you're going to have children. And because they cannot produce children, that barred them from entering into the sacrament of marriage. Will that change? I don't know. I think it's slowly starting to change. The German church a couple of years ago put out preparing for a synod, put out the question to the Vatican about blessing homosexual marriages. And of course, the answer came back as no, because as you per teaching, the answer will be no. But the fact is, there's parts of the church pushing that, right? They put out the question, right? And the German church was saying, well, we're still going to do it. We're still going to bless, right? So you see those inroads starting in the church. You see the push towards, okay, our numbers are dwindling in terms of the priesthood. We need to have the conversations open. Can priests get married? Are we going to have women priests? Are we going to have gay marriages? It's out there, those questions. The conversations have begun. Members within the church have started that movement towards the changes that will probably make sense in the future for the church. But the church is not going to move quickly. Right? It never does, because the church is concerned with the dignity of human life. It takes a process, it takes research, it takes all that informed conscience stuff I try to teach you guys about. The church is doing it itself, right? Even with heterosexuals, the whole idea of you shouldn't have sex before marriage, that's still in the books. It's harder to keep that today because the stage of adolescence has expanded into 20s, 30s, right? People are getting married later. Our our sexuality begins much earlier, right? And there was a time where you entered into puberty and then you got married. But now we enter into puberty and we have this long extension of time before we fit under the teachings of the church to get married, right? And the church put marriage in that, having sex in that area of marriage is because you're creating a life. The church is concerned with the dignity of human life, and the church looked at it and said, where are human beings ready to bring life into this world? We hope that it's when they get married. We hope that when they're matured, they are becoming responsible to make a commitment to another human being, to create a home. That's where we want children born into. Now, it doesn't always happen like that, of course, right? But in the best scenario, that's where the church's teachings go. If we could direct every human being to responsibly bring life into this world, the church would hope that's where it is. So that's how the teachings reflect, right? But we as adult Catholics, a lot of us are not going to wait for that moment because, for a lot of us, we're getting married later. So in our formation of conscience, if we decide to have sex before marriage, right? Hopefully we're doing it for love, that it's respectful to yourself and your partner, that you're prepared to deal with the possible creation of a life. I would say whether you're 13, 23, 33, 43, 53, every time you have sex, you have to be prepared that you may create life. And are you ready to take care of that life? And that's what the church is concerned with. Are you ready to take care of a life that you may create through this incredible superpower that God gave us, through our sexual organs, that we may create life? And are we prepared to deal with that, right? That's what the church teachings are about, right? They're just not being a party pooper. The church is concerned with the dignity of human life. So for those of you who think the church is very outdated, it's not, because the dignity of human life to the end of time should always be a priority for us as human beings. And the church is there to help us to make better decisions for our life and the life of someone else that's in our care. That is what the church is all about. So, so when we look at the church's teachings on this, and again, going back to our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, A single, unmarried Catholic, the same rules apply as with our LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters, right? So if you're single, you're not married, you shouldn't be having sex either. Pretty much, right? That's what it says. So there is that commonality there. The only thing is, as a heterosexual, you could eventually get married. As someone in the LGBTQ plus community, there's still that you can't. So complicated, yes. I hope this helps for you to understand and to grow with this, especially if you're at the beginnings of your career and you're, just trying to figure out what this all means. Like, I hope you grow with this. I hope you grow in a positive understanding, and that part of your teaching ministry, that you will be a person of healing for those students that might come your way, that are looking for some sort of support in their struggle. Okay, so if you want to know, right, in the catechism, it's 2358. Okay, and it goes by numbers like that, not pages, because every catechism is, different. So you can't say pages, right? But if you want to know what the church teaches, there it is. So the pink is the stuff. It's a struggle, but you have to understand why it's written. And the orange is we're called to support. Okay? And so just remember that even in scripture, why there were, scripture passages about, homosexuality, it's not for the reason that we think, right? It is, and there was only 7 verses. And boy, people who want to hurt someone found those 7 verses, no problem, right? The Bible is not meant to be a weapon. Please do not ever use it to hurt someone. It is meant for healing and for love. You can always talk to me if you have questions. God bless.